Hey there, friends. Tired of managing symptoms and struggling for answers? This holistic podcast guides you beyond one-size-fits-all advice to uncover root cause health solutions. I'm Holly Jean Mullen, your functional nutritional therapist host. Drawing from over a decade of clinical and personal experience, I'm here to help you overcome chronic issues like thyroid problems, autoimmune conditions, hormone imbalances, inflammation, weight loss resistance, the list goes on. This isn't generic advice. It's a comprehensive, personalized plan covering nutrition, mindset, and environment. Tune in for practical education, expert guests, real stories, and coaching to help identify what's keeping you stuck. It's time to understand your unique needs and tap into your God-given ability to heal by honoring nature's wisdom. Your transformation starts here. Let's go. Hello, welcome back to Real Health Transformations. And I just have to start with a caveat right out of the gate because it's like the funny farm over here. I have a new puppy. He is 9 weeks old and he is currently sitting under my desk. This is his spot when I'm working. He likes to sit at my feet, and the cats are not enjoying having a puppy around. The puppy is unbothered by the cats. He was born on a farm. He's used to barn cats. And I now have a cat sitting on the desk because the puppy's quiet. So the cat's getting curious. So at any moment, there might be animal noises. So I'm just throwing that out there. So if a puppy starts barking, if a cat starts meowing, like I said, it's just the funny farm over here. So let's get going with today's episode. I want to talk about some current events. Let's talk about health news, what's going on, specifically food dye bans. It's making headlines. And I know you'd think I'd be jumping for joy, tossing confetti, popping some champagne up in the club, but I'm not. And I'll tell you why. Now, don't get me wrong, because seeing these harmful dyes like Red 3, Red 40, they're finally getting attention. And I like that. That is a step in the right direction. But before we're given high fives and taking the dub on this one, I think we first need to just pause and take a deeper look at what's really happening here. So first, another little caveat. I did not set out to be a jaded, cynical grouch when I grew up. I am simply just the illegitimate love child of critical thinking and common sense, raised by hard knocks. And that's what I am. Here I am now, baby. Okay. This is what I am. But this is good. This is a good thing. Back to the topic at hand. This is a teachable moment because if history has taught us anything, it's that when one chemical gets banned, another one quietly slips in to take its place. And that is what I want to dig into today. And not to be a Debbie Downer, because that's not what I want to be. I want you guys to be informed. I want you to see the bigger picture. And most importantly, I want you to know what you can do about it. This isn't about fear. I am not trying to say, oh, we can't do anything right. Blah, blah, blah. I want to spread good cheer and awareness. Yippee. Right? Okay. When we understand how the system works, we can stop falling for their trickery. We're not falling for no banana in the tailpipe on this one. So instead of just reacting to what they allow or don't allow in our food, we can start taking back that control of what we put into our bodies and what we're feeding our families. So let's break this down. We're going to blow through some of that smoke and mirrors today and talk about real solutions, because Spoiler alert, that's what I like. And also the power isn't in the hands of the regulators. It's not in the power of the food manufacturers. It is in ours. So I will back up a little bit. Let me get you up to speed with the backstory of what is going on here in case you are not fully aware. So a growing number of some states in the US are enacting legislation to ban synthetic food dyes due to the health concerns around them, particularly in regards to their effects on children's behavior and potential carcinogenic properties. Most notably, and what most recently stood out to me and caught my eye was that California passed the California School Food Safety Act. This act is prohibiting public schools from offering food and drinks containing artificial dyes. Again, that's the red 40 that everyone's kind of talking about right now, but it also includes yellow 5, yellow 6, blue 1, blue 2, green 3. And this law, it is aiming at addressing those links between these dyes and developmental or behavioral issues in children. And the goal is to have this fully enforced by the end of 2027. Now, I do find it ironic that California is leading the way in banning these artificial dyes here in schools, which lead to developmental and behavioral issues in children. Yet they meaning California, blazed the trail in mandating vaccines in schools, despite the vast public outcry from parents protesting for children with known allergies and sensitivities to vaccine ingredients that have been linked to developmental, neurological, and behavioral issues. Honestly, it's a perfect example of the selective logic that plays out in public health policy. California is leading the charge here in banning these synthetic food dyes from schools and from foods here in the schools because of their links to the hyperactivity and the developmental issues. Great. I love that. I absolutely do love that. I think we should do that. But where was that same energy when parents were begging for medical freedom regarding school vaccine mandates, especially for children with known sensitivities?
By the way, all humans, including children, are sensitive to being injected with aluminum, mercury, formaldehyde, aborted fetal cells, animal DNA, just to name a few. And there's no such thing as a safe amount.
But it's like they are willing to acknowledge that artificial dyes can mess with a child's brain chemistry, but the moment you bring up vaccine ingredients, many of which have documented risks for neurological and immune system issues, you're suddenly a crazy conspiracy theorist mom. The cognitive dissonance is seriously wild. Wild when it comes to that state. But the truth in the matter is that both synthetic dyes and certain pharmaceutical ingredients should be under the same level of scrutiny. So if I were serious about protecting children's health, the approach should be consistency and not cherry picking which toxins are acceptable based on industry influence or political convenience. At the end of the day, the common denominator is informed consent. Whether it's food, medicine, environmental toxins, people deserve the right to make choices based on full transparency and not just information that's convenient for policymakers. But that is my little rant, my off-topic rant, my aside, my sidebar. But also, okay, just recently, West Virginia's Senate has approved legislation banning red 3, red 40, yellow 5, yellow 6, blue 1, blue 2, green 3 from food and drinks, also citing the same things. So this trend is starting to pick up. And honestly, I don't know what came first. I don't know where the legislation started in all of this. But as the saying goes, where California goes, the rest of the country follows. So it would make sense that other states would just kind of follow suit on this too. These legislative actions are reflecting this growing trend towards reevaluating the safety of these synthetic food dyes. It's prioritizing public health here, especially when it's concerning children's well-being, which we absolutely should do. But it also brought something to mind for me. It made me wonder, and I had to go do some digging. I was curious to know, are food dyes similar to bisphenols? Now, bisphenols are, you probably have heard of BPA. Food dyes have a similar issue to bisphenols in the banning. So, specific like Red 3 or Red 40, what I'm trying to say is it doesn't necessarily mean that the replacements will be any safer. So, synthetic dyes belong to a broader class of petroleum derived colorants. So, individual dyes may have different chemical structures. Many of them share the same common risks. So, I don't know how many reds there are, but considering that there's a red 3 and there's a red 40, I am going to assume that there's also a red 4 through 39. So it's all the same class of synthetic dyes, and they all have the same risks of that hyperactivity, behavioral issues, allergic reactions, potential carcinogenic effects. So what often happens in regulatory situations like this is there are loopholes, and that loophole is referred to a phenomenon called regrettable substitution, and that's where one harmful chemical is swapped for another with a slightly different structure but with similar risks. And that's what brings me to what reminded me or made me want to ask this question, is because I saw it happen with BPA. And you have probably seen lots of plastic things now say BPA free. Great. That was a giant marketing trick, because all they did was change BPA to BPS or BPF, etc. They're all the same chemical class, and they just change one structure. They did the same thing with phthalates. They banned one and then another takes its place. We see that with the forever chemicals, the PFAS. They have long chain versions and they started phasing those out. And then they introduced a short chain version, but it has similar toxicity. So with synthetic dyes, it is plausible for us to think that if Red 40 or Red 3 are banned, food manufacturers will now just introduce a new, lesser known version of the same thing. Maybe one that hasn't been studied as much or isn't as well publicized or as harmful, or isn't as well publicized as being harmful. And the regulatory system just typically requires significant evidence of harm before action is taken. So that means we could see a cycle where one dye is removed and a new one is introduced, and it can take years or decades before its risks are fully acknowledged. So if we take this a step deeper, dig a little bit deeper here, we can break down how regrettable substitution has played out with these other chemical families. So let's start with the bisphenols. So bisphenol A, BPA, it became widely known as an endocrine disruptor, which means that it mimics estrogen in the body, or it messes with our endocrine system. And studies have linked it to reproductive issues, developmental problems, metabolic disorders, even cancer. And so finally, in response to public outcry, companies started labeling their products BPA free. Yay, we win. We, the people, we win. But what happened is they swapped BPA for BPS or BPF, which are chemically similar, and they have nearly identical endocrine disrupting effects. So research shows that BPS and BPF, they can also interfere with hormone function. They can also lead to similar reproductive and developmental risks. And so it's really not any different. And some studies even suggest that BPS may even be more persistent in the environment and harder for the body to break down. There was a study in 2020 that found that 81% of people tested had detectable levels of BPS in their urine. So that is suggesting that widespread exposure to BPA bands is resulting in even more exposure to this BPS. So the BPA-free plastic bottles, receipts, those are often containing BPS instead. And we see the same thing happening with phthalates. And just a little side note here, it took me so long to figure out how to say that freaking word. It's the one that is spelled PHTHALATES. The PH is silent, so it's just phthalates. Phthalates. I always end up saying phthalates. I think it is actually pronounced phthalates. Whatever. Phthalates. But the PH is silent. But phthalates are plasticizers, and they are used to make anything plastic feel flexible and soft. They are also known endocrine disruptors, and they are linked to reduced fertility, birth defects, metabolic disorders, developmental issues in children. Some of them were even banned from children's products and food packaging due to these concerns. I think some of these are even linked to being like obesogens. So these are those chemicals that mess with our hormones and cause weight gain. And the problem here is that they were replaced with other similar hormone disrupting chemicals. So they just keep swapping them out. I think you're like starting to see the theme here. The effects have not been regulated. They're doing the same thing. So emerging research is showing that these substitutes are still carrying many of the same health risks. So one of the things they got rid of was DINP and DIDP. Those were initially believed to be safer than I think it was DEHP. I think that was the one that was banned. But studies are now showing links to liver and reproductive toxicity. Yay, thanks for the swap, guys. In the European Union, it has classified DINP as a substance of high concern, yet it is still highly and widely used here in the US. And then the forever chemicals, the PFAS, what happened here was these are used in nonstick cookware. That's where you will most commonly see them. They are also in waterproof clothing. They are also in our athletic wear, ladies, our leggings. It's in food packaging. The most well-known PFAS, the chemicals, are PFOA and PFOS. And those were phased out after they were linked to cancer, liver damage, and immune system suppression. And so companies replaced them with the short chain compounds. They're called Gen X chemicals. And those were marketed as safer alternatives. But research is now showing that these Gen X chemicals are just as persistent in the environment and carry similar health risks. There was another study done in 2019 that found that the Gen X chemicals, those accumulate in the blood and have also been linked to liver and immune system damage. And we're finding levels, measurable levels in the water near industrial plants. We're showing them in water pollution, just as we were with the other forever chemicals that have been banned. So, what does it all mean? Banning Red 40 or any other synthetic dye might sound like a win, but unless we take a bigger step and ban all petroleum-based food dyes, we are just playing chemical whack-a-mole. The manufacturers aren't going to suddenly start using natural colorants like beets or spirulina or turmeric. That would cost too much. It would just be too simple, right? But instead, they're going to tweak the formula just enough to slide past regulations. They're going to slap a new name on it and they're going to act like they've done us a favor. But if history tells us anything, it's that these replacements usually come with the same health risks, just less public awareness. And so the real takeaway here is that a single ban doesn't mean progress. It just means that the clock has been reset until we figure out the new substitute is just as bad. And this cycle has played out over and over again with the BPA, with the phthalates, with the forever chemicals, and now with the synthetic food dyes. Some countries are smarter about this, and instead of nitpicking individual chemicals, they take a class-based approach and they are banning entire categories of the harmful substances instead of just waiting for the next loophole. So if we were really serious about protecting health, I think we would do the same with these synthetic dyes instead of just picking them off one by one, which is a never-ending process. So no, I'm not celebrating legislation passing when we're just boasting like, yay, we're reformulating a problem due to a ban. Like I'm not celebrating that, and I want to know what they're replacing it with. Because like I said, if history is any indicator, it's probably not a real solution or even an upgrade. So at this point, you might be asking, well, why doesn't the US like follow suit with the other countries? Like, why are we lagging behind in banning or regulating these chemicals? And I will give you 7 reasons. The first one is that in the US, we use a proof of harm approach instead of a precautionary principle. So in other countries, like especially in the European Union, they regulate chemicals based on the precautionary principle, meaning that if there is any reason to suspect harm, the burden of proof is on the manufacturer to prove that is safe before use. Where here in the US, the burden of proof is reversed. A chemical is presumed safe until overwhelming scientific evidence proves dangerous. And by the time regulatory agencies act, millions of people have already been exposed. So, for example, the European Union banned BPA from baby bottles in 2011, while the US only restricted it in 2012. And that was after consumer pressure, not because of proactive FDA action. The second reason is corporate lobbying and industry influence. The food and chemical industries in the US have deep pockets and an enormous influence over regulatory agencies like the FDA and the EPA. And these are powerful lobbying groups. They have the American Chemistry Council, and that group works aggressively to to prevent bans and promote the idea that more research is needed before action is taken. An example here would be the phthalates. Now I can't even say it. Industry. It's successfully delayed bans for decades, even though research has linked them to endocrine disruption, infertility, birth defects. And then third point, the FDA has weak authority over food additives. So unlike in Europe, where food additives undergo strict safety reviews before approval, the US still operates under a decades-old system where companies can self-certify. They can self-certify their additives as generally recognized as safe. You may have heard this as GRAS, G-R-A-S. And so they don't have to do any independent safety testing. So Red 40, Yellow 5, and other synthetic dyes, those remain legal in the US, even though some are banned in Europe just due to this GRAS system. That is why. Another thing is we have slow and fragmented regulation here. Like, in addition to the things I've already said, like, our regulatory process is just slow here. Everybody knows that if it has to do with the government, it is a slow process. Things require long legal battles. There is extensive review before any action is taken. When bans do happen, they often only apply to specific products rather than eliminating the chemical completely. And again, they're not looking at the entire class of chemicals. They're just looking at chemical. Another example here is that the US took nearly 20 years longer than Europe to phase out lead in gasoline. In the health industry, we have a very common expression, or just kind of like a known fact, that we operate based off of scientific papers now, knowing that it's going to take the industry 20 years to even catch up. Like, that's just a known fact in how we work. And that's sad. It's sad because there are still so many people out there that only will take advice if it is coming from a governmental agency and not just from research from someone who's done the research, or from someone who has experienced the negative health effects. So that's unfortunate. Okay, fifthly, this is a state-by-state thing versus a nation-wide action, since federal agencies like the FDA and the EPA, they often stall on action. So states have started passing their own bans. And so that leads to kind of like a patchwork of regulations rather than this unified approach. So California banning Red 3, they can do that, but it's still in other foods nationwide. And states like New York and Vermont, though, they have restrictions on forever chemicals, but those chemicals still remain in products in the rest of the country. So it's just a little bit disjointed there. There's also the next point, fear of economic impact. Regulators here in the US, they are often prioritizing industry profits over public health. And the argument there is that bans on certain chemicals would hurt business, and it would increase costs, and it would lead to job loss. And the short answer there is that the USDA has repeatedly blocked stricter pesticide regulations, for example, because of pressure from the agriculture industry. So this just goes to show that they do, in fact, prioritize profits over people. And I cannot say that enough. They do not care about you. They do not care about your health. They do not care about your family. And I will say that till the cows come home. For as long as we're allowed to still have cows, because cow farts killing us, y'all. Okay, lastly, my point number 7 on why the US lags in regulating these chemicals is that we, as a culture here in the US, we have a culture of consumer responsibility. And that means there's a strong push for personal responsibility rather than government intervention. And I say that with a little star asterisk because the government sure does like to intervene in a lot of other things, but not here. So instead of banning harmful chemicals outright, regulators often rely on label requirements and just let the consumers decide. So I like to call this the CYA. That's what they do. So instead of just banning synthetic food dyes altogether, the US just allows them with a warning label. Like, hey, this product might kill you. And the problem there is that we have so many warning labels on everything that people don't even pay attention to them. I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, well, everything will kill you, so what does it matter? Because we have warning labels on everything, people are just numb to them. So I can tell you that approach is not working. But like I said, it's a CYA for the government and for the manufacturer. And it's really not doing anything for the consumer at all because it's just become background noise because we're so used to seeing it. So I think compared to Europe and other parts of the world, the US really does prioritize corporate interests over public health unless there is overwhelming consumer outrage. Harmful chemicals are often going to be remaining in products. They're going to be remaining in use until lawsuits or undeniable evidence force a change. Even then, who knows? Because they might just make a separate court and a separate money pot like they did with VAERS. But all of this can still just take decades. So until the US shifts towards a precautionary approach like the European Union, we are going to likely continue to see dangerous chemicals phased out elsewhere while we here in America are still going to be exposed. We might just get a warning label. Do you want to call that a win? Sure. So let's wrap this up here. Where does this leave us? Are food dye bans a step in the right direction? A part of me says, sure, yes. But I hate this. Yes, they are, because we're talking about it, but are they the victory for public health that the headlines are making them out to be? No, not quite, not exactly. So I just want you guys to really just understand what is going on here. Okay? We don't have to wait on regulators to fix this for us. And so if I can just close this episode out echoing my sentiments from the start, is that we already have the power to choose better because yes, we can read labels. We can choose not to be blind to the warning labels. We can choose to educate ourselves on ingredients. We can opt for products without artificial dyes, and we can support companies that are truly reformulating and not just swapping one synthetic for another. And most importantly, we can stay informed because, again, when you understand how the system works, you can stop falling for their tricks. Evil only has one playbook, and there is nothing new under the sun. So, if today's episode got you thinking, I hope it did. You can do me a favor, share it with a friend, keep asking the right questions, and just remember this one thing: you do not need a government ban to make better choices for yourself and for your family. That power has always been yours. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time on Real Health Transformations. Thanks for listening to Real Health Transformations. I appreciate you joining me. If you found value in what we covered today, I'd be grateful if you could leave a review on your podcast platform of choice. It really helps spread the word and just helps me get the show out to more people and lets more people find us. And if you'd like to submit a question for me to answer on a coaching episode or to apply to be a live guest on a coaching episode, check out the show notes on how to contact me for that. The show is for educational and entertainment purposes only and is not intended as medical advice. As always, please consult your trusted doctor or medical professional before making health and lifestyle changes. I'll catch you next time on Real Health Transformations.